Indiana Governor Mike Braun delivered his second State of the State address this week, telling a joint session of the General Assembly that affordability is his administration's highest priority. After ticking through what he portrayed as the biggest accomplishments of his first year in office, Braun acknowledged that Indiana families are struggling to make ends meet, especially when it comes to utilities, childcare, housing, and health care. Hi, I'm John Schwannis, and on this week's show, we'll ask the first-term Republican for more details about his strategy to ease Hoosiers' financial hardships in this session and beyond. Indiana lawmakers, from the State House to your house.
Indiana Lawmakers is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations, with additional support provided by Par Ritchie.
At the beginning of his term as Indiana's governor, Mike Braun pledged to lower costs for health care while improving transparency, aiding in small business development, and decreasing property taxes. His signature policy, property tax reform, evolved through several iterations between the Indiana House and Senate, but ultimately passed with large public support. The resulting Senate-enrolled Act 1 provided new property tax credits and changed farmland property assessment, earning high praise from his Republican colleagues who echoed the governor's claim that it was, quote, historic. The change is estimated to lower property taxes for about two-thirds of Hoosier homeowners. Critics, however, argue that the lost revenue will harm county and municipal governments, which stand to lose an estimated $1.8 billion over the next 3 years. Aiming for government efficiency, Braun reorganized his cabinet, creating new vertical hierarchies reporting to cabinet secretaries. He audited the Indiana Economic Development Corporation to add transparency and accountability and appointed a new board of directors. Braun also mandated all state workers return to the office and launched a new program to enable them to bring infants to work as part of his Family First Workplace initiative. Braun made major cuts in state spending, slashing $2 billion in the biennial budget. This led to 5% cuts in most state agencies and higher education, and the elimination of funding for trails and public broadcasting. Braun's first year as governor did not lack challenges. Several controversies arose involving his lieutenant governor, Micah Beckwith, including Beckwith's purchase of an expensive SUV with state funds, allegations of a deepfake AI video circulating among Beckwith's office mates and staff, his comments about slavery, and investigations into ghost employment in the lieutenant governor's office. Arguably, Braun's greatest challenge was the redistricting debate. Responding to federal pressure, the governor publicly led support for redrawing congressional maps to favor Republican candidates in this year's midterm election. Following months of debate, it passed in the House, but failed in the Senate.
I am pleased to welcome, fresh from his second State of the State address, Indiana's 52nd governor, Republican Mike Braun. Thank you for being here on State of the State Address Week. This continues a tradition that dates back, I think, 30-plus years, so thank you for keeping that
My pleasure to be
intact.
here.
I know it's a busy week. Your speech was punctuated by applause numerous times. I didn't have an applause meter running, but my ear tells me that the biggest applause line is when you talked about Indiana University's football team and its sort of unimaginable season and squaring off here for the national championship. A serious question, what is the impact on the state? You talk a lot about jobs, and you talk about our image nationally and internationally even. In terms of finances, in terms of brand, in terms of cachet, what does IU's success this season mean to the state?
So I'll go back to when I got out of college. I was down in '76 celebrating on the streets in Bloomington because my wife, 3 of our 4 kids, IU alums. So you remember that, and of course that iconic.
You were Wabash. You didn't win the Monon Bell that year,
No,
I guess. So, all right.
I can't remember if we won that or not, but I remember what a big deal it was. And basketball was my favorite sport. Played it in high school, and our team went to the semi-state. So you had all that there then, and that's withstood so many good teams to be the last undefeated team winning the championship. That had context to it because that was, when night was done, it was our 5th. When you look at Indiana, with the stats of having the worst Division I record in football, and by the way, 2 nearly flawless seasons. We're now the second worst historically. That shows you what a deep hole it was. So
in that first year that they lost, last year, they lost to an Indiana-based team in Notre Dame. So I guess for a governor of Indiana, you can't go wrong on that.
No, it was a win-win. And here, in just a second season, when it's had to carry that type of history around, I mean, I think Signetti said it correctly. It's maybe make a movie about it, and I'm sure that will be done.
I'll bet it's in the works already, right?
And then each game, as they were, I think the one that really defined the season was actually Penn State, because none of this we could still be where we're at, but it wouldn't carry that added dimension of being undefeated. And then, ironically, 50 years later, IU maybe housing a record that it would really be hard to imagine any other school could do both. So I think all of that plays into next Monday having that build up to where every Hoosier's excited about it. And that was a big applause line. I think along with what the state police have done and National Guard, and of course that's got other underpinnings for why that would be. And so I'm excited. And then you weave in stuff that you just get as a freebie, the kid, 9-year-old from Shoals.
Your new education advisor, as you dubbed him.
Yes, that is calling for a little bit of latitude post-game. So,
which you said is a great idea. I won't call for it unilaterally, but a great idea.
I don't have that within my power to do, but basically said it'd be a good idea and let it up to local school districts.
Are you going to the game? We just heard a number of governors will be there, and in fact just heard that the president, Donald Trump, Marco Rubio will be there.
Okay.
What are your plans?
Maureen and I are going to be there. So looking forward to it. We were at the Ohio State Championship Big Ten game and did not go to the Rose Bowl or the Peach Bowl. I was definitely going, and Maureen being an alum, there would have been no question. A governor of a state that's in that, it's just one of the benefits that it's just fun to do. And really where we were kind of second guessing, I think Alabama and Oregon pretty well put any of that to rest, that if we just stick with what we've been doing, it's just a really good chance of culminating in a big night.
And I was in the stands, by the way, for the Penn State game. Not that I'm saying I'm the good luck, but I'm happy to be there if needed.
I remember it took 2 or 3 looks on the instant replay to see how there was a toes
I knew right
width.
away. They didn't ask me, though. They didn't ask me. On the subject of big showdowns, high-stakes contests, and we mentioned Donald Trump, let me ask you, and we'll get into the speech, but this stage was set for this session by this unusual battle over redistricting, something that Donald Trump had pushed vociferously, something you pushed vociferously. Essentially, it was a defeat for you when 21 members of the Senate Republican caucus joined with all 10 Democrats to reject what you had called for. I'm not asking you to relitigate that, but how does your defeat, your setback there, affect your standing going into this session?
I'll put that in the context of what I did 37 years prior to getting to the Senate. And, I'm an outsider, entrepreneur, business owner. Most would never want to become a senator or a governor. It worked out for me. Many think that you should be from the farm system of politics. I can tell you that you're so much better prepared for the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows, because that's the nature of a business. I mean, there are no guarantees there. Here, I get asked all the time, well, how do you like being a governor versus a senator? I say they're both easier than running a business, especially a small one that you scale over time. There's so many pitfalls, and everything is on the line there. So it gives you that dynamic. And here, I think the folks that are maybe philosophically not aligned with where I'd be, and when I debated Joe Donnelly, I said, the key is I'll respect your point of view, and I'm not going to demonize you, and I would expect that in return. I think that's what's gotten into politics, to where all of a sudden, if you disagree, it gets to that level.
And that was the opponent you unseated when you won election to the Senate, for those
that,
who
of course,
might not have
was
lived
a
here
discussion
at the
about
time.
abortion, where he tried to bait me, and I had so much practice in D.C. That you're not going to get that often with me, and I do know the subject matter. And when it comes to this was a national issue that descended upon the state. And it wasn't a surprise because there were 3 or 4 others that already did it. And where you stated it like that, I would say it's more a consequence for those that were against it. And that, to me, still doesn't have anything to do with last night or why I ran for governor. Because you've got to be able to separate issues like that, not generalize upon them. And that's how you get through life, because life is full of victories and defeats. And the hardest thing I ever did was running for Senate, starting with 1%. So I know how to get from here to there. And the people that are philosophically against you will never give you the benefit of the doubt. And like when Schumer and whoever his folks were that financed a $30 million negative campaign on a guy from Mayberry, RFD, that happened to know how to get from here to there. It's a good story. I think it's the story that was sellable and makes sense. It's not going to please people once you get there necessarily. And anymore, winning in a landslide is 55%. So that means 4.5 out of every 10 people don't like you, disagree with you, mostly both. So here, this was something that came from afar, came to Indiana. We were the exception to the rule. And whether that's going to work or not, John, in terms of mid-decade redistricting, it doesn't seem to have as much cachet simply because California countered. But to me, it was valid because it addressed an inherent inequity of the playing field not being even, and the loudest voices against it were the ones that have gerrymandered so well over the years.
And I don't want to dwell on this because we're here to talk about the speech, but one more question, if I may. You did expend a lot of capital, and you ultimately...
I view it as expending very little capital.
Okay, well...
And the fact is, when you look at all that we've gotten done, the fact that probably did more executive orders than the last 3 governors put together, they're already doing legislation based upon the initiatives we put in place. And the thing that gets overlooked most is what we did to reorganize state government to actually navigate through, imagine a property tax issue that dominated everything. And it is historic tax relief. The very far extreme wanted to go more. And then you got mostly Republican office holders, local government officials that think maybe it was too much. So capital is something that, again, the analog to business. If you are on base and you can make a message, like I think it was a very good one last night, you just go from this to that. And I think that has very little applicability to what I think can happen working with the legislature over the next 3 years.
Of course, now you had said, along with the president, that you would work to defeat the 21 members, including the Senate President Pro Tem, who voted against the redistricting proposal. Are you going to he's not up this year, of course, 2 years, but how serious are you about defeating these 21 people?
So that's a consequence that will play out over time. And I think they were out of sync with most Republicans and conservatives in our state. The loud voices, like on most, would, I think, our side comes more from a silent majority point of view. And when you look at people that said they were against it, I think most Republicans, by a large margin, and conservatives wanted it to occur. It took a while to get there, and I think that the main consequence will be just what you've mentioned. And again, I'm going to focus on affordability. I've been the loudest voice in the U.S. Senate for reforming health care, which is out of sync with most Republicans. Fixed it in my own business 18 years ago,
without a premium
based on
increase.
Wellness and prevention, not expensive remediation. No business owner has been able to do that I'm aware of. And most Republicans and conservatives don't want to wrestle with it because it's the biggest interest group out there. It's the biggest part of our economy, and therefore you'll have the most blowback from insurance companies and hospitals for it.
Right. And we do, when you look at the healthcare arena and other things, we rely on a lot of federal money,
yes.
right? And you had expressed concern, and Lieutenant Governor and others had, if this doesn't pass, redistricting doesn't pass, we're going to suffer consequences.
I'll make it very simple.
Yeah.
That wasn't betting the farm. And for anyone that says that, they're doing it because they were inherently probably not with you in terms of the other stuff you're for, which is leaner government and the approach. So I think if you put too much emphasis on that, the only concern I'd have would be for the ones that dug in that were out of sync, and how that evolves, I don't know.
But it may not, you're not going to be leading the charge against them. I'm
going to be focusing on kitchen table issues.
And you're not worried about repercussions long-term about federal spending or about decisions about what could be placed to your offices?
You've seen that hasn't played out.
Well, you got your waiver.
Because my relationship is good there. And the only thing that'll be a consequence is the degree to which that was a political mistake. Right. And I know it made folks against it feel good, and they kind of, maybe extrapolate that into something bigger nationally. I think that's a mistake. Florida just came out, and DeSantis is pursuing it. That was kind of maybe. Now it's concrete. We'll see what happens.
All right. Let's talk about another showdown, and this one you want to talk about, I bet. The showdown against inflation, higher costs, in some of the arenas you talked about. That was the thrust, really, of your speech. You talked about some of your accomplishments in the first year of office, but then affordability. You used the phrase affordability crisis. Now, you attributed it also to the last D.C. administration, as you put it.
Well, that's 100% true. We never.
Well, the prices have gone up. I saw new data yesterday since
prices are down
Donald Trump took office.
2 and 3%, which is 1% off the norm. And the Biden administration delivered us roughly 25% inflation, 22, 23, and 24. I was there. And what we did during the CARES Act, every rep and senator voted for it. That was enough. $4 trillion.
That was COVID to shore up
the CARES Act.
Yeah.
That was a mistake because it was an overreaction to COVID, and as we went through it, it was severely detrimental to elderly men with comorbidities, and the advice was just wrong. And we borrowed and spent tons of money. Most of us that respected it and did things more along the line of a common sense reaction came through it well. That had some contribution to it. But then when the Biden administration socially engineered the stuff they wanted to do through Build Back Better, the Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, that was an oxymoron. That is what we're dealing with. And when you create that much inflation, that's baselined into the new pricing table. And the only way you're going to lower stuff is by supplying more of it. But you're basically inherited that just like we have over time. So it is still the hangover effect of bad policies from that administration. And I think maybe there was not enough focus on that narrative, and where the Trump administration's now having to come from behind to explain it. But what they're doing sets the stage to mitigating the inflation that Biden gave us.
All right. Well, regardless of how it started, you can agree that
I would know a little bit about it because there were very few of us in the Senate that had
you were in the
background
front row seat
macroeconomics, business experience, and have lived your life where you've had to deal with these factors and actually have some foundation for making sense of what you're saying.
Well, about the Hoosiers that you talked about in your speech that are hurting, you've targeted several areas: housing, utility costs, health care, child care. Let's take them in that order.
Yeah.
You endorsed several bills. You didn't necessarily have your own agenda, but you made very clear you said 100% behind certain bills. Doug Miller's bill, representative, that would create more housing. Why is that important?
Doug back when I was in the House.
And this is basically removing some of the local control over building, what materials you could use to build. Can you have a setback? Can you do this? Sidewalk? Important to do that?
It is, because the places that have already gotten through that, like the Cook Medical Group, Steve Ferguson, they've been doing it in West Baden, Spencer, and Bloomington. They're getting together with the local jurisdictions. Don't make it an impossible journey to stub in utilities. Work with us. And they've been able to take 10% out of a starter home. A guy named Ryan Keller in Terre Haute has done it even on a larger scale. Those are entrepreneurs in the private sector. So it's not a mystery of what needs to be done. And Doug's bill formalizes that. And I've been on that, since I've been running for governor. And that's part of getting more out of less and making sure some of the regulations that might have had some good intention aren't making it difficult in the real world to actually lower costs.
Any concern about encroaching on local control? We hear that all the time,
This isn't. They still have to, my point is do this in a collaborative way. Work with your local home builders. Doug's formalizes that and probably takes, I haven't read the bill particularly, but it is going to be something that is, if it passes, which I think it probably will, is going to make it easier for home builders to do their job without sacrificing something that's going to make it negative over the long run by doing it.
And let's take them again in order. Utility costs. You appointed, you mentioned, and you cited her, your new your new utility counselor, who you pointed out her first action was to say, go back to the drawing board. I want to see less, not more. You have 3 new members, including Andy Zafe, state senator, who just left. Now he'll be the IURC chair. Right. How hopeful are you that that can make a real difference?
Well, first of all, let's use some simple numbers there. There are 5 on the commission. There are 3 that are going to be ratepayer conscious. And this is like a turning of the page. I think the IURC has been very accommodating to the IOUs. Most of the issues you hear are out of them, not the municipals, not the REMCs. A co-op like Hoosier Energy would be to their members, and Wabash Power, that's different. And I think it's probably been a better utility format to deal with for those that have it. But here, this is the first issue we can completely get out in front of. And you saw Abby Graves, that case will actually run through the IURC probably in April, and they all know it. And again, it's something, data centers inevitably will come up. If we get it right, and I just spoke to one of the hyperscalers last night, they now know that they're going to have to not only pay for all the generation, they're going to have to add electrons back onto the grid, and you're going to have enough issues of trying to put them in near population centers. They're not going to like it for reasons in addition to rates possibly going up. So you'll have to prove that you're not impacting current ratepayers, families and businesses. And we're getting that straight out of the gate. They want to come to Indiana because of our business climate and environment. And if we get it correct, it would be such a benefit to 70 of our rural counties that have plenty of land. They take up a relatively small amount. You try to stick it next to Franklin Township or in populated areas, you'll get blowback because they just don't want one. But it's going to be it's probably driving 2/3 of our GDP growth currently in the countries because it's that big a deal. China is trying to get ahead of us on AI, and you need data centers to power the technology to make sure you're going to stay abreast.
Finishing out the list, healthcare and child care, you endorsed bills, several bills last night, one that would require hospitals to be more open about assistance plans and payment programs and those types of things for patients. So there's a specific bill. Now with child care, though, which we've had a couple dozen closures just since last session of child care facilities because of the money squeeze, ostensibly, you said, you cited it as an important issue and something to be dealt with, but you said you're eager to dig into it in the budget session, which is not now, but next. What, if anything, can be done this session?
Number one, both chambers are not interested in reopening the budget. So I'll do like—
Nor are you, I'm guessing.
To me, I would be agnostic on that because now that faulty forecast based upon tariffs, which the market had completely discounted, that's where that forecast came from. And constitutionally, we've got to adhere to that forecast. And if you recall, that was about a week before the budget session ended. You throw property taxes and that into it, into being as good a shape we are politically, last night kind of punctuating it, and that should be an indication to where I don't know how you could have had a rougher issue to deal with on property taxes and then getting that surprise. And by the fact that I said I was going to run government more efficiently, we've now regained that billion back. And our cash flow's proving it. So that gives us a lot of flexibility either now, if there was an appetite, but I don't think we could put together legislation that would be smart enough to deal with an issue like childcare without working on it for a while.
Fair enough. We only have 20 seconds probably, so I'll ask you to be brief. But let's start where we started, with football, with sports. You talked about in your speech getting the Chicago Bears to be, well, maybe not the Hammond Bears, but getting their facility here. How realistic is that? Again, we're almost out of time. But
So it is in the stages where we're discussing the details of it. They have clearly publicly said they've been rebuked by their own legislature and mayor. And that, to me, was a critical error because they're going to find, the more they look, that Indiana would be a much better place long-term to have a franchise.
All right, I'll get my season tickets. Governor, thank you so much for being here. Again, my guest has been Republican Governor Mike Braun. Time now for analysis. Joining me are Ed Feigenbaum, publisher of the newsletter Indiana Legislative Insight, part of Hannah News Service, and Laura Merrifield-Wilson, associate professor of political science at the University of Indianapolis. All right, that speech, it was typical in that it's a joint session of the General Assembly. It's a statewide television audience. But there wasn't a lot of, here's what I want to do. It was more like, you have some good ideas. I'm throwing my support to them. Ed, did that strike you the same?
Yeah, I think there are generally three components to a State of the State address, and he kind of went through two of them. But he didn't really push the leadership aspect. And that's something that we've become accustomed to seeing. You know, Governor Holcomb was laser focused on different pillars each time out, and then you'd have certain other governors reach into the balcony and point out individuals up there that would either be examples of things that they've done or aspirational.
And he did a little bit of that. I mean,
with his own cabinet secretaries, but not with ordinary Hoosiers, you might say. And even in the State of the Judiciary address the same day, the Chief Justice did some of that same kind of thing, showing people who had been through certain kinds of programs and what it meant to them and what it was going to mean for the system. But I think what was really interesting to me was that the governor kind of deferred to the legislature on a lot of things in terms of leadership, and that he really felt, I think, that he's not necessarily inhibited by anything that they're going to do, and that as he indicated during the interview a few minutes ago, that he's going to be able to do what he wants to do, and he's done a lot of what he's already done via executive order and just the implementation of things at the executive level through his agencies.
Laura, does that make, assuming you agree with that take, politically, strategically, is that a sound approach rather than saying, this is what I want? You know, we've heard governors talk about the guardrails. I want it between here and here. You know, this is it. Instead of that, he said, I really like this bill. I'm 100% behind that bill. Here for that bill. Is that sound politics?
I think it makes sense, certainly given the timing, which is unusual, as we talked about before. But in addition to that, it felt like this was an address where he was highlighting what he's done in the last year, and he's at that point in his administration where he can give a little bit of a highlight reel for the last 12 months, but then also what he supports with the legislators. I agree with Ed. He didn't talk a lot about his own personal agenda. He says, I want to see creative solutions to healthcare, and he highlights a bill authored by Julie McGuire, and he would give those kind of shout outs. It felt much more like a recommendation, using the bully pulpit to really influence those that are watching and listening, saying, these are the legislators I support, this is the legislation I support, this is what you should be paying attention to. Much less clear insight, really, in terms of what his legislative agenda is and what he wants to do, probably most importantly, after the legislative session.
And part of the problem, John, is something that you alluded to with the governor in the interview, and that's that he may have lost some of his clout, some of his mojo by what he did with the redistricting issue. And then also he just hasn't really built the kinds of relationships with legislators, whether it's leadership or the rank and file that some other governors have done in previous administrations, even though he is, to a certain extent, a creature of the legislature. He, I think, really is going to suffer from not having built some of these relationships and not being able to call upon political capital like some of the other governors have been able to do. And I think that may be one of the reasons that we saw him not necessarily say, okay, these are the things that I'm really pushing for, because he didn't want to necessarily lose them. Others, on some of the big issues, he's pushed toward the 2027 session instead of 2026.
You know, Laura, he said he didn't expend a lot of political capital on redistricting, but others might beg to differ. He certainly leaned heavily on the Senate President Pro Tem and others who still feel, I think, some hurt. There was a member of the Senate, not the President Pro Tem, who said the first thing the governor should do this session is apologize to the Speaker Pro Tem, which he didn't. And I couldn't get a sense during the interview of whether he's burying the hatchet or he's still sharpening the blade, if I can distort that metaphor. Talk about what Ed just said. This whole redistricting, how did it shape the state of the state and his agenda this session?
Well, you know, it was notable he didn't talk about it. It was not surprising. I wouldn't talk about something I did poorly in the last year in a self-assessment. I'm going to focus on the victories, right? But it's the subtle undertone in this entire legislative session. There was a lot of tension. There's a lot of conflict between the House and the Senate, between the governor and the legislature. And so I felt what was most telling was not actually the State of the State address, but it was Senate President Pro Tem Rod Bray's response to it. And he was the last person in the legislative leadership to talk on Wednesday evening. And when he said, you know, I like what the governor talked about, he emphasized some of the points. You don't have to love everyone you work with. You do have to have a good working relationship. I think it's much more of a bury the hatchet, move on, for the sake of their own political careers, but also for the sake of the party.
All right. Well, rest assured, I love and respect both of you. So we don't have to worry about any of those things. Thank you both for going extra innings here and sharing some additional thoughts about the State of the State address and the governor's agenda this session.
Thanks, John.
Coal and natural gas remain Indiana's primary sources of electricity, but with AI-related energy demand soaring, policymakers are looking to renewables and perhaps modular nuclear reactors to meet the need. On the next Indiana Lawmakers. Well, that concludes another edition of Indiana Lawmakers. I'm John Schwannis, and on behalf of our analysts and crew, WFYI Public Media, and Indiana's other public broadcasting stations, I thank you for joining us, and I invite you to visit WFYI.org for more State House news. Until next week, take care.
Indiana Lawmakers is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations, with additional support provided by Par Ritchie.